Now, why would that be? Let me now link this back to another fact. In 2 years' time, we will all be remembering, if we have the courage to remember, which I don't think we do, the fact that the First World War started 100 years ago, now 98 years ago. In the last century has been a very dramatic century. When you think of history, please don't confuse history with our lifetimes. When history is written, we'd be bloody lucky to get a few pages, which constitute our 60, 70, or whatever years, we are blessed with. History has its own pace. And you look back, 100 years is not that very much, But in these 100 years, there have been 4 world wars. 4 world wars. Why were they called world wars? Not because the whole world fought in them. They were called world wars because they were fought for the control of the world. The first, Now, very interestingly, each war segued into the second, into the other, for reasons, for cause and consequence that were deeply related. Now, we all know, it's conventional history now, all school children also know that the Versailles Treaty led to the consequences that led to the Second World War. But don't forget that the Third World War started at the end of the Second World War. The Third World War was the Cold War. And believe me, the Cold War was cold only in Europe. It was very warm elsewhere. It was warm in Southeast Asia, it was warm in South Africa, it was warm in Southern Africa, it was warm in Latin America. And definitely it was very warm in Afghanistan, where it ended. So the Second World War led to the Third World War, and Third World War was a world war, no doubt about it. This time led by the Americans and the Soviet Union. Now, the nature of war changes. The strategies required for victory in the Third World War were as dramatic as the strategies required for the Fourth World War are different from the Third World War. What is the Fourth World War? The Fourth World War began at precisely the spot where the Third ended, Afghanistan, or extended Afghanistan-Pakistan region. War really has no respect for national boundaries. Even those of you who have studied the Vietnam War knew that Vietnam was only one of the nations involved in the war. War finds its own geography. So the Fourth World War actually begins, and this is the war against terrorism. Now, what else is different in this war? This is the first war which is being fought for reasons and for dreams or objectives that are outside a conventional framework of understanding human behavior. I mean, you can understand wars being fought for empire, wars being fought for national extension of national space. That is what German militarism was all about. Certainly that was Nazism was all about. Nazism was about the extermination of a people, the Jewish people. These are horrific realities, but they are still within the pale of our conventional understanding. The Fourth World War against terrorism is being fought between conventional forces on one side, forces in uniform, and therefore who have to be ipso facto obedient to certain legal responsibilities, to accountability. I mean, it is not Abu Ghraib only that is important. What is also important that those who have done it have been exposed by the people, and so on. There's accountability. But on the other side, there are no nations. There is no alliance of nations. There are no armies as we understand it. These are loose militias fighting not even for an ideology. I don't believe the terrorists have an ideology. They only have a medieval discourse and a medieval mindset. And they're looking at objectives that are completely outside the, as I said, the reasonable objective space that we have created. So it's extremely difficult. Now, this war against terrorism, which is being fought, is why indeed have Americans, and I think the whole NATO forces, which fought, the previous 3 wars, in historic terms, there is no greater praise for a war strategy than victory. Each previous war they have won. Why has the West lost its way in the Fourth World War? 1. Number 2, why is the central battle? This is the other great difference. The central battlefield of the previous 3 wars was Europe. The reason why the Cold War did not become warm in Europe, because the price of getting warm in Europe would have been a nuclear holocaust. That was the only reason. If there had been no nuclear weapons, there would have been armies. Stalin asked the Pope how many divisions he had, and he would have used his divisions. But the other great difference is that the central battlefield of the Fourth World War has shifted from Europe to Pakistan. Why? Because these militias who are fighting a war not in the name of national geographies and so on, but in the name of faith, they can find sanctuary only in a nation created in the name of faith. And that is why they are found there. And that is why they go there. And that is why it is difficult to act against them or to expect even a Pakistan establishment which may genuinely want to move against them. So what really, and I would like to continue the analogy of the Second World War just to give the explanations. Then why has America lost its way? After all, Pakistan is a strategic partner in this war. What is a strategic partnership? A strategic partnership is not, for God's sake, based on the basis of friendship. No. You don't become a strategic partner. Even Canada and America are not strategic partners because they are friends. Stalin and Roosevelt could be strategic partners against Nazi Germany. But the moment their need was over, they shifted into enmity. A strategic partnership is not based on the basis of common friendship, but it is created on the basis of a common enemy. And this is the real problem. Till the Cold War, Pakistan was a legitimate ally of the West, because its commitment against the Soviet Union was as strong as your America's commitment against the Soviet Union. In fact, India was not a legitimate partner, because India did not have the same view of the Soviet Union as America had or Pakistan had, and so on and so forth. But in the war against terrorism, Pakistan, America, and Canada do not have the same enemy. And that's where the contradiction lies. In fact, the true strategic partnership of this war is India. Pakistan, and I have said this before, is akin in the Second World War to having a strategic partnership with the Vichy government of Marshal Pétain rather than Charles de Gaulle. If you, or let's say if America had a strategic partnership with Marshal Pétain, why would America be surprised if all the plans for Normandy were handed over to Berlin? So today, why are you surprised if all your plans for Taliban end up on Taliban's desk? Pakistan has a use for Taliban after your withdrawal is over. It needs the Taliban, because for Pakistan, Afghanistan is not merely the strategic space required for its confrontation with India. It is also the desire to create what it calls Islamic space. And this objective of creating an Islamic space, by the way, has been part of Pakistan's policy at least from the time of Ayub Khan and Bhutto. Please don't confuse this that Zia suddenly turned up and created it. In fact, most of the Islamization that has happened in Pakistan has been created by the Bhutto family. Nobody seems to realize that the Taliban was created by Benazir Bhutto. not by Zia. I mean, Zia has many other things which he can claim, much to our regret, but not this. So this really is the real problem that we see in this nature of the war.